So this is the part A. This is the part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, timed at 23:30 Hrs GMT, and coming from London in the UK on Monday the 22nd of November 2021. Now we are into the hour after the cruelty bill, the corruption bill that is going to penalize people in the lower income groups, so-called care for the elderly bill. It's careless and uncaring about the policy of not caring by the Boris Johnson fronted cabal that is called the government. So we have among the latest fantasy claims made by Boris Johnson about his status is, of course, the claim that he now compares himself with the prophet Moses. This is a kind of move away from his comparing himself for decades with Winston Churchill. Because Winston Churchill is the image of Winston Churchill as cultivated by Johnson and his ilk is the image in terms of their insistence or persistence, the image that follows the level and the layer of the likes of the prophet Moses. This is the mentality that is based on the Little England racism that implicitly compares itself to a level and a stage that is far higher to the rest of the world. Little England. And Little England, Little Englanders believe, or brainwashed to believe, Little Englanders are brainwashed to believe that Little England is phenomenally bigger than the rest of the planet Earth. So that's the mentality that Boris Johnson kind of personifies and embodies. This is in denial. This is in denial of the reality that is known to all the people in the world. And there is no holding such a fantasies to account because they don't accept, they don't recognize anything that the 8 billion people or so on the planet Earth believe and recognize and feel obliged to recognize. And Boris Johnson's fantasy and the Little English mentality So we shall be talking a lot more about all of these happenings in the House of Commons today. That is just coming to an end Monday, the 22nd of November 2021, when Johnson's cruelty bill against the poor and the elderly in low income has passed through the Commons vote by a majority of 26 votes, which means just under 50 or so conservatives refused to vote for this one, which we shall explain later. Now, this is Libby Pervert. Now, as we have said, Libby Pervert is a racist and a very cruel woman. And Paul Decker, who has just been in the news about Ofcom, Paul Decker was editor of The Times in the early 1990s when Libby Pervert wrote a very intentionally cruel, sadistic piece supporting or advocating the cruel treatment and murder of cats. The short version of the encounter I had with this Times newspaper at that time is that I wrote several dozen letters condemning the Times, because the Times editor, which is Paul Decker, I blamed him for not allowing my letter or letters being published in the Times. And the letters were about Libby Pervert. Now, Libby Pervert is, of course, someone who has had platforms on the BBC. And despite the fact that she is a cruel person, openly calling for cruelty to be meted out to cats, other animals. And the role of the Times, role of Paul Decker, show that contrary to the claim by Boris Johnson, this country is populated by people in various platforms, not the many, but the people who make the decisions, who are corrupt and dishonest and cruel, which is part of the Conservatives' main purpose, as is evident in the bill that they've just passed in the House of Commons today in the last hour with 26 majority. Now, Pervert here is taking revenge against Azim Rafiq. Now, as we have said before in the last 2 days, Azim Rafiq's alleged anti-Semitic tweets, the contents of the alleged tweets do not compare with anything that he has suffered at the hands of the racists in Yorkshire County Cricket Club. And it is absolutely important to distinguish between mentioning a Jewish person, or any other person of any other faith, mentioning them, naming them, and then the other thing is to incite anyone to attack them because of their faith or their ethnicity or whatever. It's a very important difference. What Azim Rafiq did is he did not incite hatred against the Jewish people. because Azim Rafiq's tweets and whoever he was tweeting with or to, they did mention the Jewish people in a slightly derogatory manner, but they did not incite hatred against any Jew or Jewish people. The fact that they didn't incite any hatred doesn't make it acceptable for them to tweet the way they did, because that was based on the Jewish people's identity, ethnicity, whatever. So to that extent, Azim Rafiq and his friend or contact were wrong. And the fact that Azim Rafiq has apologized and said that he is himself ashamed to find that he did make those tweet comments. The fact that Azim Rafiq has apologized and confessed to being ashamed is millions of miles away from the racists like Boris Johnson, who made far more deep and offensive and inciting comments about Muslims, about the Turks, and Muslim women in burqas. And Boris Johnson, years after his anti-Muslim racist incitement came into the public view, has refused. It's not just failed, but refused to apologize. In fact, he's insisted that his anti-Muslim racism was part of his right to express an opinion. Now, if there is a right for Boris Johnson to express racist, anti-Muslim opinion, then what he is saying is that he doesn't recognize the relevance to his behavior, his conduct of any law that says that offensive, racist remarks like he made were to be penalized, and the person making those was or were to be penalized. So he's saying that he doesn't care what affront, what effrontery, what outrageous kind of attitude he shows against a particular named group of people or individual. In fact, Boris Johnson was penalized by Conservative Party. If ever anyone punished Johnson, it was a man of Jewish background, Michael Howard. Michael Howard actually sacked Boris Johnson from a minor post at that time in the early 2000, early decade, the first decade of this century. Because Johnson was accused of lying, and Michael Howard found enough evidence that Johnson had lied. Johnson's lying to Michael Howard, who was the leader of the Conservatives, included his lies about his adulterous relationship with Petronella Wyatt. Now, Petronella Wyatt is now in her 50s, but she was 20 years younger. She was in her 30s when Johnson abused his position as the, quote, holder in the post of editor of the magazine Spectator, which Spectator is the kind of long-running and increasingly aggravating, kind of playing aggravating racist role. And it has changed ownership over the decades. And Johnson was in the post as editor for reasons, for links, not far from the links and reasons and the narrative operated by the daily bribing Boris Johnson graph, otherwise known as the Daily Telegraph. So Petronella Wyatt was sexually exploited, let's say, and she accepted the exploitation herself under the circumstances of vulnerability. Because Petronella Wyatt is the daughter of a former Labour member of Parliament, Woodrow Wyatt, who himself has had a contradictory kind of set of connections. Because he turned out, he later became a allegedly close friend of Margaret Thatcher, who is Conservative Prime Minister. And he had also been noticeably close to the mother of Brenda, the current Queen, the Queen Mother. So Petronella Wyatt turned out to be a right-winger, although Woodrow Wyatt himself was a Labour MP ex. Woodrow Wyatt was not really a left-winger, although he had a period in the 50s when Clement Attlee was the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister. Woodrow Wyatt was part of a group of Labour MPs that claimed themselves to be left-wing. And so therefore Woodrow Wyatt was quite contradictory in terms of political affiliations, etc., etc. But his daughter, Petronella, didn't belong to the Labour Party in any way, shape or form. So when she went to Oxford, she claimed later, she left within a few weeks, I think. And she claimed that the reason why she left Oxford, whatever college she went to, because she was being harassed and bullied. And she claimed that her being targeted for harassment and bullying was because of her right-wing political kind of affiliations. Well, Petronella Wyatt has not changed. She is still a right-wing politically affiliated person. So when Boris Johnson kind of targeted her for sexual exploitation at the Spectator, Petronella Wyatt must have been aware of his political right-wing kind of tendencies and also aware of Boris Johnson's unreliability, lack of ethics, lack of morality, etc., etc. And the few years that she had the sexual relationship with Johnson included the fact that she had a miscarriage and one of her children, babies, was aborted. To what extent that abortion was kind of connected with the behavior of Johnson is not detailed in public, but that is a fact. And when Michael Howard, as the leader of the Conservative Party in the country and in the House of Commons, because that happened while Tony Blair was in post as Prime Minister in the name of the Labour Party. So when Michael Howard became aware of Boris Johnson's relationship with Petronella Wyatt, Michael Howard actually demanded that Johnson tell the truth, but Johnson continued to tell lies and denied the affair and whatever. So Michael Howard sacked Boris Johnson. And today's piece in the Times by Libby Parvard doesn't mention Johnson's corruption and dishonesty and racism. Libby Parvard actually concentrates on the anti-Jewish, on the kind of prevalence of anti-Jewish sentiments and attitudes among people who are not necessarily in the group that can be called thugs and criminals. What she's saying is that anti-Jewish attitude is a normal thing. And when she was at the convent school, thereby she's saying that she is of the Roman Catholic background, or at least she went through Roman Catholic kind of schooling. And there was a thing in the prayers in the Roman Catholic school which said in the prayers that God should make the Jews convert, presumably convert to Roman Catholic Christianity. But that is what she says. What Libby Parvard doesn't say is that racism against African people or against Asian people of all religious groups. Africans and Asians have got many religions. And the most predominantly, majority of the African and Asian people have got two religions. One is the Islamic faith and the other is the Christian faith. The Christian, again, is distributed among various denominations, various parts of Christianity when it comes to the African people. But essentially, what Libby Parvard is doing is ignoring the numerical size of the African people or the Asian people in the UK who, in terms of numbers, were many times more in numbers than the Jewish number, people of Jewish faith in the UK. And she doesn't discuss the anti-African and anti-Asian racism that is absolutely ignored by those who have latched onto the admission by Azim Rafiq to his anti-Jewish tweets of 10 years or so. So the racism against Muslims, the racism against Asians and Africans in Britain is ignored by the Daily Mail, by the Scum, by the Guardian, and all the other outlets in Fleet Street, all of whom have splashed big letters and big headings as if in celebration of the fact that they can undermine Azim Rafiq. And their capital has been Rafiq's 9 or 10-year-old tweets. Altogether, maybe about 6 tweets were exchanged between Rafiq and his contact, in which Rafiq and his contact said Jews are like that. Whatever the wider description or wider context is not reproduced in the reports. But essentially, the crime that Libby Parvard is saying Rafiq has actually committed is to mention the fact that some individuals are Jews or Jewish. That is a crime. Now, when Michael Howard was leader of the Conservatives and Boris Johnson was a minor kind of occupant in the minor post in the shadow cabinet that Michael Howard as an opposition leader was leading. Michael Howard actually sent Boris Johnson to Liverpool as well, because Boris Johnson, quite apart from the fact that he had lied, or he was in a lying relationship with Petronella Wyatt, had also published a very clear denunciation. It's not just naming Liverpool or people in Merseyside, but actually detailing, according to him, their unacceptable and uncivilized attitude, dependent attitude. Now, Liverpool and Merseyside are, of course, the people in that area are, of course, among the ones who remain outraged by the behavior of the Sun newspaper, which published in 1989 a number of false allegations against the fans coming from Liverpool to the game where the stadium collapsed and many people died, most of them from Liverpool. And that still remains an outrageous failure, example of outrageous failure by the quote authorities, by the people who were in post to safeguard the safety of these people. And this happened in Sheffield. And on the day after the massacre, the scum actually repeated the lying claim by the police and others that the fans were to blame for the collapse of the structure or structures. And this happened in 1989, and 99, it's more than 12 or so years later that Johnson was ordered by Michael Howard to go to Liverpool and apologize to the people for publishing or making the anti-Liverpool, anti-Merseyside statements. So Michael Howard did two things. One is to sack Boris Johnson from the shadow cabinet, which happened after, I think, the Merseyside insult. And he ordered Boris Johnson to go to Merseyside and apologize to the people. So Johnson was doing something that had been done 12, 13 years previously by the Rupert Murdoch paper, the scum, which blamed the victims for the collapse of the structures. And that was something that was issued on behalf of the police in Sheffield. So this is called the Hillsborough disaster, which happened on the 15th of April, 1989. And it is described on the internet, was a fatal human crash meaning crush, during a football match at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, England, on 15th of April 1989. And 97 people on the record here are recorded as having died. And the cause is summarized here as saying, overcrowding in central pens of the stand, location Sheffield. And there were 2 inquests, and there was an inquiry report in 1990, Tyler report, and there was another one, Hillsborough Independent Panel, 2012. And we shall go into so that's the Hillsborough disaster that took place in April 1989. And the Sun, let's see what the Sun said. Well, there is no entry on the Sun directly that I can find at this minute in this search, but the point is that the nearly 100 people died and many more injured. And the deaths, we call the massacre because it was due to negligence, nothing to do with the kind of players or the fans being responsible, which is what the Sun said. So there was this background already. When Boris Johnson was elected an MP, Conservative MP, and Michael Howard became member of Parliament himself, he had been already, but he became the leader of the Conservatives. And Boris Johnson then published a very insulting comment about the people of Merseyside, where the fans are from, most of the fans who died. So it was something that is completely, absolutely unacceptable. So severe was the outrage against Boris Johnson that Michael Howard had no alternative but to order him to go to Liverpool and apologize to the people. Now that was the event. Boris Johnson, in effect, insulting the people that had been blamed for their sons and husbands and whoever was in the kind of stadium in Hillsborough when the collapse happened and they died. So Boris Johnson has got record of being deliberately cruel and offensive and outrageous and insulting to the people he thinks he can get away with insulting. People in low income, people in poor areas, generally, which is Merseyside, and people like Muslim women. Now, of course, when Johnson made the remark against Muslim women wearing burqa, looking like bank robbers, Michael Howard was not leader of the Conservative Party as far as I can see. And whoever was the leader of the Conservative Party and was not Michael Howard didn't care about the feelings of outrage that the Muslim women and the Muslim population as a whole in the country felt. So this is what has happened on Monday, today, that is, Boris Johnson has passed a motion of cruelty to the elderly, cruelty to the low-income people. The Conservative Party has witnessed only one leader, party leader, not in post as Prime Minister, the party leader, Michael Howard, who took any action, any notice about racism and about blaming the poor and the people in areas like Merseyside. David Cameron is part of the thuggery, the caste of thugs who have been in post as leader of the Conservative Party in the last, let's say, 30 years. I mean, the exception being Michael Howard, of course. And the thugs, the most notorious thug and criminal who preceded Johnson as the leader of the Conservatives was, of course, dodgy Dave Cameron. Cameron is a thug and a crook and a criminal. Just in the same way that Johnson is, because both Johnson and Cameron, when they were officially enrolled at the relevant colleges at Oxford in their own relevant times, belonged to the thugs club called there was a thugs club, Bullingdon Club. Now, Bullingdon is spelled Bullington, but I have kind of spelled it. Bullying Done Club. So Bullingdon, I have converted it, I have rewritten it as Bullying Done Club. Bullying Done Club, because members of the Bullying Done Club, the main activity was to go around whatever parts of the city of London, Oxford they were, and to smash furniture within restaurants and clubs and whatever. That's the role. Now look at the piece by Libby Pervert in today's Times. And her piece is against Azim Rafiq. And she is using the term Now the piece about Azim Rafiq that Libby Parvat has written is obviously prejudiced against Rafiq and prejudiced against the evidence. Because according to Rafiq, he didn't remember even doing that tweet. And Parvat says that is remarkable. The fact that he didn't remember that tweet. For a start, in the contents of the alleged tweet, there is nothing to remember. It was and must have been one of thousands of exchanges, whether on Twitter or verbally or physically, that Azim Rafiq or anyone else would have done in 9 to 10 years. So there is nothing remarkable. By saying that is remarkable, Libby Parvat is saying that Azim, despite her acknowledging that he had profusely apologized, that Azim Rafiq was far more sinister than he is, or he can be said to have been, as based on the contents of the tweet. Because it wasn't even a tweet against Jews or about Jews. It was a tweet about somebody whom Azim and his tweet contact, were comparing to being a Jew, meaning they are very stingy with their money and whatever. Now, Libby Parvat doesn't recognize racism. That is a day-to-day affair against Muslims, against other people of other backgrounds from India, Pakistan, African backgrounds. And the fact that she is given that platform in the Rupert Murdoch Times is itself a condemnation of the racist arrangement. There is no columnist, there is no writer in any Fleet Street papers who is not of a European kind of white background. What there is are token ones who don't get even 1% of the prominence in the coverage. And of course, as I keep saying, the letters column in the Times is totally confined to Little England. And there is a cartoon immediately above the piece by Libby Parvat on page 33 of the Times today, which features Priti Patel, who is mocked because the general news about Priti Patel in the last 24 hours has been that she's struggling to keep her job. And the struggle is based on the fact that despite her various daily kind of comments against migrants, they say she's not being successful in stopping migrants crossing into England altogether. Now that's the cartoon. It's not by the usual Times cartoonist Peter Brooks. It's by somebody whose name is not legible or cannot be read in the way that it's written. So it's the narcissist, Priti Patel, that is featured in the cartoon in the Times today. Now, here is the truth about the migrants. 2 pages, 3 pages later. That is the Times. And that is where the main item is. And the main item is that Afghanistan is riven by famine as 500,000 flee. Imagine 500,000 people crossing the channel into England. There hasn't been 500,000. There hasn't been even 100,000. So that is the one confession or admission to the origin of the migrants these days, Afghanistan. Well, the news items are almost acknowledging the truth about where the migrants are coming from. The columnists in the Times and other Free Street papers are doing their own incitement by lying about the reason why the migration crisis persists. And as I said in January 1992, in my broadcast on Channel 4 News slot called Slot, if the Western countries, including the UK, didn't take action to stop the poverty and hunger and destitution in Africa and Asia, in the countries which are the origins of the migrants that were destined to leave their countries in search of financial security and even political safety, then there would be such a rush, such an exodus, such a big number of people seeking refuge and seeking asylum in the Western countries that whatever was happening in the early 90s would look like a picnic. And nearly 30 years since I made that broadcast, 29 years ago I made that broadcast. So 3 decades have passed. And the Western countries have not only not done what they should have done, they have done the opposite. Because in January 1992, Afghanistan was not in a position where it was forced into being in 2001, when George Bush and Tony Blair led the occupation of Afghanistan. And the rest of the stories about occupation and war and Saddam Hussein and everything else, these were the wrong things to do if migration from the two continents was to be stopped or reduced or tackled in a way that migration didn't feature as a big issue in social terms as it is now. So everything that Priti Patel is in the news about is about the numbers crossing and the role of the French being facilitators and even causes of the crossings. But Priti Patel never says anything about the states of societies from which these people desperately trying to flee. And this is the one about the Afghanistan situation where 500,000 have fled. And 500,000 people from Afghanistan alone. 500,000 people trying to flee Afghanistan or have been fleeing Afghanistan is a lot of people. And it's a much bigger problem facing those people, facing those societies, than is ever acknowledged by the lying Fleet Street, and is not acknowledged by the liar Priti Patel, is not acknowledged by the liar Boris Johnson. And there are two names in this piece writing about the Afghanistan people. One is, of course, a Western name, Richard Spencer, and the other is an Indian name, Anchal Vora. Aid agencies are demanding emergency intervention by the United Nations in the crisis in Afghanistan amid fears a new flood of refugees will try to cross into Iran and head west. So what they're saying is that the people from Afghanistan are not traveling through countries to the north of Afghanistan, but to the south and southwest of Afghanistan, which is Iran. And then to the west, northwest of Iran is Turkey. And that the Afghanistan people, the refugees fleeing Afghanistan, are fleeing to Iran, from where they're crossing into Turkey. And they're going to the north of the Turkish region, Greece, and other places. So, what this piece is saying, aid agencies are demanding emergency intervention by the United Nations in the crisis in Afghanistan amid fears a new flood of refugees will try to cross into Iran and head west. 500,000 Afghans have now tried to enter Iran since the Taliban seized power. That's only 2 months. That happened in August, so September and October, and this is November, so 2 months, calendar months. At least 320,000 of those are now inside the country, that is Iran. Is it Iran inside the country? What are the meaning? Are they meaning Iran or are they meaning Afghanistan? That particular sentence is not clear. So reading that particular sentence again, at least 320,000 of those are now inside the country, despite 180,000 having been turned back from the closed border. So it must be Iran they're referring to. Jan Egeland, a senior former United Nations official who is now head of the Norwegian Refugee Council and who has visited Iran, said hundreds of thousands more were still flocking to the border. He said they were fleeing west to Iran rather than east to Pakistan because the ultimate goal for many was Europe. There is a well-established migration route from Iran via Turkey or Russia to Europe and the UK. About 35% of all migrants crossing the channel on small boats are either Iranian or Afghan, according to figures released this week. So, Iran is not given credit for accommodating so many hundreds of thousands of refugees from Afghanistan. Very significant indeed. This is the news item which doesn't give credit to the Iranians for allowing so many people, hundreds of thousands of people from Afghanistan. And this kind of denial, this kind of lying, denial, untruthfulness by the Fleet Street is all over the place, which is why the disinformation, this is disinformation, because they're not telling the truth to the public that are reading the papers or are using their news outlets' websites. And that is the narrative. And the same case is applicable, the same interpretation is applicable to Pakistan. And Pakistan has accommodated millions of Afghan refugees in the last 21 years. And the British people, the people in the West, are not told about the various generous roles being played by Pakistan and Iran, because these countries are Muslim. And what these countries' role has prevented is an explosion, civil explosion across the Western countries, because most people have been absorbed in Pakistan and Iran, and on the way in Turkey as well. These are all Muslim countries, very much so. And they're not being given credit for their help in stopping large-scale civil unrest across the racist West. So there is this significant paragraph, which this piece in the Times, written by Richard Spencer and Anchal Bora, says, an article in the Islamic Republican, it's a reference to the Iranian paper, a state newspaper, accused the United States of deliberately engineering the crisis to import a security threat to Iran. It said that terrorists were being smuggled into Iran as refugees in collusion with the Taliban. That is what the Americans are accused of doing, that they're colluding with the Taliban to smuggle terrorists into Iran to cause anti-Iranian terror activities. Saad Mohseni, an Afghan commentator, writes in the Times today that Afghanistan's impending collapse will send shockwaves through the region in the form of refugees and radicalization. So Saad Mohseni's piece, we shall come to that in a minute. So the Saad Mohseni piece on page 32 of the Times today is headed, "The United States is making another grave error over Afghanistan." And Saad Mohseni is an Afghan-Australian businessman and director of Mobi Media Group. So he says in the Times piece on page 32 of the Times of Monday, the 22nd of November, "The United States government is putting its head in the sand by trying to walk away from its obligations in Afghanistan. The lesson the world has learned over and over is that what happens in Afghanistan rarely remains there. The country cannot cope with its political, humanitarian, economic crisis without US intervention. Its economy is expected to contract by 30% this year. More than 95% of its population is likely to be below the poverty line in months. 95%. Afghanistan's collapse will take the form of mass starvation, escalating to civil war, all of which will send shockwaves through the region in the form of refugees and radicalization. Beyond the immediate threats of terrorism, a resurgent Al-Qaeda, a turbocharged Islamic State, and dozens of other global organizations. The country remains one of the biggest exporters of heroin to Europe. The multiple crises will force hundreds of thousands of Afghans to seek refuge in Europe, Australia, the United States, and Central Asian regions. It is important to bear in mind that Afghanistan is only 2 countries away from Europe, Iran and Turkey. A mass exodus into Europe would alter the political landscape there, elevating the likes of Viktor Orban and other anti-immigration politicians and affecting multilateral alliances such as the European Union and NATO. The concern is that by focusing only on immediate challenges, such as evacuation, the American administration may be giving away what leverages it has left in Afghanistan. America's allies are looking for leadership, and its opponents are moving fast to create relationships with the Taliban and lock out the Americans. The United States must strive to find the sweet spot where assistance to the Afghan nation continues without allowing the Taliban to declare outright legitimacy from the assistance. Engaging the Taliban does not mean full recognition. The United States government must avoid transactional approach when dealing with the regime and opt for a more strategic one. The offering could be a combination of incentives that culminate in full cooperation of the Taliban government once a number of important benchmarks have been met, including a broad-based government, namely women's rights and free expression. Now this Saad Mohseni, of course, is part of the imperialist kind of continuation. And he doesn't see Afghanistan as an autonomous country with democracy, with the structure of its own, whatever the name of the people controlling the state or the powers in the state. So this is not kind of asking the West to solve the problem of starvation and hunger in the country. It's asking for intervention. Intervention is not the same as solving the issue of hunger, starvation, and mass poverty, which is what I said in my broadcast on the Channel 4 news slot in January 1992. And what I said in January 1992 remains valid up to this day today. And we shall be talking in due course about this issue later, not necessarily in this edition, but in later editions. So the various experts like Paul Johnson, who is the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who are given platforms by the Times and to some extent by the Guardian, to some extent by the Financial Crimes. They turn out to be not experts at all, but as participants and as propaganda kind of colluders for various narratives, various agendas that do not reflect the needs of the majority, the needs of the many, and most certainly are not helpful towards establishing any level of justice and fairness in what remains of society. Society mainly is in the grip of the evildoers, fronted by the liar, congenital liar Boris Johnson. And the so-called opposition being fronted by the criminal Keir Starmer, who has politically murdered the Labour Party and is himself a crook and a criminal and a wrongdoer. Where is the source then? Where is the source? If all the evidence that we are looking at points to criminals and wrongdoers and evil ones being installed in positions of making decisions affecting the many, decisions that are wrong, that are unfair, unjust, then where are the people who are holding the positions of making decisions that are people who are fair, and people who are truthful, people who are not nasty or evil. Nasty as admitted by Theresa May in the early decade of this century, that the Conservatives are known as the nasty party. She did say that, and she came across at that point as being herself not part of the nasty party or nastiness. But when she became Home Secretary, within 10 years of her description of the party as the nasty party, she began her own nastiness. Now, this is the Daily Mirror today, Monday that is, which says there is an investigation by the Mirror where the investigation has found the cruelty and torture of animals. And for that reason, I'm not going to read any of it, except to say that this is a tip of the iceberg of the cruelty to animals that actually takes place every day. And there is no opposition by politicians, not by MPs, and not by Fleet Street. This is an exception. This is an exceptional piece by the Daily Mirror. And I would estimate that thousands of animals are massacred, murdered, and brutalized and tortured every single day in the UK. And I would say that all the particular so-called animal welfare charities, like the main one numerically, RSPCA, are complicit with the torture of the animals. And Libby Parvert, who has got the piece about Azim Rafiq and her kind of lying, untruthful, over-exaggerated kind of statement about anti-Semitism. Libby Parvert was the one that had written in the Times early in the 1990s, justifying cruelty to cats and other animals. And Paul Decker was the editor at the time of the Times, and I wrote several dozen letters, and all of them were, of course, sent by fax, because in the early 1990s, I was not using any internet at all. So it was mainly fax machines. So the level of debate, the level of, if you like, cruelty being promoted and backed by the Fleet Street was bad in the 1990s, but it is even worse now. And hardly a piece in the Times or in the Guardian, serious, significant piece ever appears against cruelty being done to animals in this country. And there are almost kind of legislation in place apparently against cruelty. Nobody is monitoring the daily flouting of the so-called anti-cruelty legislation, and the Labour Party is not doing anything at all. Nor indeed is the so-called Green Party, which has got one single member of Parliament in place in the House of Commons, Caroline Lucas. And because of her absence of any political action as an MP, I have renamed her Caroline Ridiculous. Caroline Lucas is ridiculous because whatever the green, universal green kind of political program might require her to do as the MP, she doesn't do it. And when she does appear, Caroline Lucas appears as a ridiculous irrelevance. Caroline Lucas was an MEP, member of the European Parliament, for many years before she became a member of Parliament for the Greens. And when she was a member of the European Parliament, Caroline Lucas was as ridiculous and as fatuous and as stupid as she has been since becoming an MP. And there is no other kind of political party. I mean, our starting assumption is to leave the Conservatives out of the calculation because the Conservatives don't care about animal welfare. Conservatives are the ones that support open, brazen cruelty and murder, massacre of foxes by dogs, hunters. And there is no outrage. There should be outraged response to and reporting on these massacres and murders. But there isn't. So that's Fleet Street being complicit with the massacres of innocent animals, and all the animals are innocent. And Libby Powers, in her pervert piece, doesn't go anywhere near acknowledging what I'm saying goes on and what does go on. Now there is a piece here on the business section of the Times of Monday, the 22nd of November 2021, which is headed Treasury, that is the Finance Department, Finance Ministry, cracks down on council's risky borrowing. Council in a plural with an apostrophe after this. Council's risky borrowing. So the chief business correspondent of the Times, Louisa Clarence Smith, writes in the first paragraph, the Treasury plans to clamp down on risky local authority borrowing by offering lower cost public loans to councils if they pass the vetting of Britain's new infrastructure bank. So it mentions Croydon and Slough. It says the councils in Croydon and Slough have effectively declared themselves bankrupt in the past year and were accused by the government of poor leadership and chronic financial mismanagement. Now that's the tip of the iceberg, of course. But the mismanagement is supposed to be the opposite to good management. There is no council in this country, in Little England, which numerically has the most numbers of councils. There is no council that is managed well, truthfully managed well, and there is no council that is democratic. There is no council that is opposed to corruption. There is no council that is not corrupt. And it goes on, the list goes on. So this heading, Treasury cracks down on council's risky borrowing, takes us back to my challenge to Robin Wales. My challenge to Robin Wales was in 2018. Was it 2018? In 2018, in March, on the 14th of March 2018, I did a live broadcast on a satellite channel at that time. And I had it was a half an hour program. I had less time than Robin Williams was given. And that was nothing to do with the content and the quality of what I was saying and what he was saying. That was to do with the kind of servile role played by the program. Servility was to suit Robin Wales, not according to the actual content and the quality of the contributions that were being made by me or by Robin Wales. And that is something that we shall be talking more about separately. Now, Robin Wales was saying that the Conservative Party's policy against local councils' independent actions about housing was to blame for the housing crisis faced in Newham by people who have been long-term in need of housing. And Robin Wales said similar things about the restrictions by the government, that is Conservative government, against local councils making any initiative, taking any initiative to build homes that people needed. So I said to Robin Wales, in response to both his kind of excuses, because there were only excuses. And what happened was that Robin Wales said that there was nothing that the council could do. I rejected that, and I said to Robin Wales and to the viewers, of course, that constitutionally there was an option. There were several options, but there was one well-known option for any council, like Newham Council, and the option was to take the government to court, challenge the government's policy. And Robin Wales said that he didn't take any such action because he was legally advised, or Newham Council was legally advised against challenging the government policy in the court system. Now, I don't accept that courts are effective. I don't accept that courts are not honest. I do assert that the courts are themselves corrupt and criminals. But the fact that a council could take the government to court and the court to reject any such application would be, in the least, a matter for the records. And Wales had no record. What Wales said was that he was legally advised. So I said, I want to see the legal advice. And Robin Wales promised that he would let me see the legal advice. And as that was the program broadcast live, March, April, May. So the March, April, so it's 6 weeks before the actual election of 2018. Robin Wales was still there for 6 weeks in post. And I had several communications sent to him, reminding him of his promise and challenging him to show the legal advice. Robin Wales did not even respond. So Wales lied on the program when he said that he doesn't make any comment, any statement, any assertion about anything which he doesn't carry out. I don't make any promise that I don't keep. And he didn't keep the promise. So Robin Wales lied, but Robin Wales didn't lie just on that occasion. Robin Wales lied for 16 years because he was in post as the mayor of Newham, mayor at the expense of Newham for 16 years, since 2002. So councils are not kind of represented or fronted by honest people, truthful people, accountable people, transparent people. Councils are fronted by liars like Robin Wales. Councils are fronted by Lutfur Rahman, who has been comprehensively described as a crook. He was in post as mayor at the expense of the people of Tower Hamlets from October 2010 until he was ousted by Richard Morey on the 23rd of April 2015. And Robin Wales's replacement in Newham, Roxana Fiaz, is a liar herself, as is John Biggs, who is the replacement as the crooked mayor following the ouster of Lutfur Rahman on the 23rd of April 2015. So when the Times says councils, it means nothing. By councils, they are leaving out all the corruption, all the dishonesty, all the abuses by the persons who make the decisions in the name of the councils. So Fleet Street is lying, Times is lying about the councils themselves. So there is a piece that is rare piece in the Financial Crimes on page 21. It says the skilled asylum seekers pursue the right to work and careers. A UK Home Office policy barring 50,000 people from employment is being challenged in the courts. That is a reference to the courts that I made to Robin Wales in March 2018. So what is this one saying, concluding? And it's saying that it can be a frustrating experience for Abdul to take a walk near his home in Feltham, West London. Abdul, who asks that only his first name be used, often sees the hangars through the perimeter fencing surrounding Heathrow Airport. As a former senior airline maintenance technician, he would love to be carrying out engine changes or diagnosing faults. The UK is to be desperately short of his type of expertise. No, reading that again. The UK is so desperately short of his type of expertise, that those with similar experience receive preferential treatment when applying for visas. But until recently, Abdul was barred from all paid employment. That restriction, which was lifted on November 10, put Abdul, originally from the Pakistani province of Balochistan, in the same position as many of the other more than 50,000 people in the UK awaiting rulings on applications for asylum protection. The UK's Home Office which oversees immigration policy, has maintained a nearly blanket ban on allowing such would-be refugees to undertake paid work until since 2002. So that was 8 years of the Labour Party so-called controlled government in the UK, 2002 until May 2010, when Gordon Brown gave it to David Doji Cameron. So there is no real difference in terms of the economy, the skills, the equation, human rights, common sense even, between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, even before the Labour Party was politically murdered by Keir Starmer. So what Keir Starmer has been doing is, of course, murder, political murder. So what this piece about the migrants, asylum seekers pursuing the right to work says is that this piece acknowledges, on the basis of the evidence, that the UK government, which we refer to in the context of all the international obligations, charters, treaties, conventions that it is signed up to, that it is breaking those treaties, charters, conventions, declarations every single day. And the cost is only measurable in the billions of pounds. The cost of damage, loss to the people and to the society in the sums of billions of pounds. So when people pick up their paper, because they do pick up their paper, they don't pick up their whole lot of papers that we do. For anyone who is watching this program or who does watch this program, we spend about £20 every day, average, buying and collecting some. It's between 20 to 30 pounds that we have to spend in order to do the research, the factual research. So anyone else who is not able to travel and is not able to spend thousands of pounds worth every single year in researching the facts, evaluating the facts and analyzing, is getting the benefit of uncountable amounts of hours and money and so on from watching this program. As we said, this is a diagnostic program, this is an evidential program, and this is in addition to the newspaper's contents. This also does the narrative, the agenda and the script come from. Those include the existing, quote, political parties, the parliament, and the various local states, including local councils like Tower Hamlets Council, Newham Council, Lambeth Council, Southwark Council, and other councils as well. It is staggering. It is staggering, illogical, and completely stupid that thousands of people allowed in the country are being stopped from working. I mean, where do the illogicality and stupidity get identified? How stupid? The court system, starting from the county court in the civil side, magistrates court on the criminal side, all the courts deserve to be diagnosed every single day because the courts are lying. And the careerists called judges are corrupt to the core, and most of them are racist, and most of them are ignorant and idiots. These judges have no idea about what the councils do. No, these so-called judges have no idea about what the councils get up to. So let's see if we can find any evidence from the time they spent as, quote, elected councillors. Let's take Tower Hamlets. Tower Hamlets Council hardly had the representation of the whole population, say for the period up to 1990. What it did have was a large number of people who voted for it, but most of the voters remained democratically unrepresented. Democratically unrepresented. That is to say, the people who voted for the councillors or the candidates for becoming councillors were not represented, apart from being represented or cast as or used as voters, which is not an assertive position when there is no say in the behavior of those who got elected with those votes. So it was in the 1990 General Council election in Tower Hamlets that a significant kind of ethnic background difference kind of took place. And most of the ethnic background difference took place by the fact that a significant number of Bangladeshi origin persons became councillors for the first time. There were two other councillors with Bangladeshi backgrounds before the 1990 election. Three, let's say. One was Sadiq Ahmad, one was Ashik Ali, and one was Nurul Haque. But we shall cover their roles in the statement about the roles of the others who were elected for the first time at the 1990 election. I stood as a candidate in the 1990 election, but I didn't get elected because I didn't stand to get elected. How is that? Because I stood in order to make a manifesto commitment and to stop the Labour Party getting elected. That is to say, to stop the Labour Party getting elected to run the council. And I did that as part of my challenge to the crook, Neil Kinnock. Neil Kinnock was the leader at the time of the Labour Party. And Neil Kinnock had colluded, was complicit with the local Labour Party liars who had conspired to stop me becoming a Labour Party candidate. I was selected, but this was denied by the various tiers. So I told Neil Kinnock that that was a lie, that I was a Labour Party candidate and they were denying it. That denial was a lie. And he should restore my candidature, which Neil Kinnock failed or refused. So I told Kinnock in a fax or a series of faxes that the Labour Party would not be returning to power in Hrs Council because I would stop them by doing the campaign, which I did, and I stopped them. I told the truth about the Labour Party in Hrs being crooks, and I told them repeatedly and clearly enough that their lying would be held against them, and I would make sure that they didn't get the necessary votes, which they didn't. Now, this is part of the campaign that I did. I did the campaign to stop the liars, which I did. Now, those who became councillors with Labour Party cards in 1990 are no longer councillors, let's say. But in the period from 1990 up to very recently, they've made noises, they've made claims that they've done things for the community. When they do that, they make reference exclusively for the voters from the Bangladeshi side of the demography. And I've said this before and I'm saying it now. I want to see evidence of each of those councillors doing whatever they said they did for the community on the record. Let them produce the records of what they did. And on the facts, my assertion remains and has been that they didn't do the things that they suggested they did. If they did do things, and if they think that I'm not recognizing those things that they did, then let them put the records, not manufactured record, not some kind of invented memory. The actual contemporaneous evidence of their statements, their voting. What did they say? What did they want the council to do in terms of policy about any aspect of the electorate, any aspect of the population in Tower Hamlets? What date did they do it? Each of the action. What was the policy that they were kind of advancing or promoting? And how many people in the community who are not councillors or who are not councillor candidates can they produce as witnesses to any campaigning work, grassroots work that any of these councillors did in the community to defend the community? And what field or area or aspect of the life of the community did they actually affect and intend to affect by their activities? So if they don't have such evidence, then they must not refer to themselves as former councillor, because there is no such thing as a former councillor. That's in the past. And you cannot change the past by referring to yourself as being a former councillor. What did you do? What can you do now by way of producing evidence, record of what you did when you were a councillor? Not what you can do as a former councillor. There is no such thing as former councillor, because you are not sitting as a former councillor anywhere. The minute you sit somewhere where councillors should sit, you cease to be a former councillor. You become a current councillor, and you are not a current councillor when you are depending on being called and known by and known as a former councillor. Today is not yesterday, and you can only refer to yesterday by reference to evidence. You cannot be yesterday. You cannot be in yesterday. You can only find the maximum that you can find from yesterday is the evidence. Where is that evidence? Because the reality is, the truth is that the 1990 intake of the Labour Party candidates, Bangladeshi background, was not itself produced by anything. It was a product of the campaign for 12 years, let's say, that the community did after the racist murders of Altawali and Ishaq Ali in next door Hackney in 1978. And looking back, it looks that those who became councillors in 1990 for the first time had been active at any time during 1978 to the time of the election of 1990 to get themselves elected councillors, or get themselves housing, or get themselves some kind of benefit personally by invoking the general existence of the campaign against racist attacks. The fact that these councillors, the ones who were making claims that they were councillors in 1990, the fact that they have not done anything against racism is evident in the fact that there is no record of them doing anything against racism for decades. Again, if they disagree, then let them produce the evidence, independent evidence. I never got elected councillor, and I never needed the councils to do the things that I do for defending the community. And all the evidence of my work is independently accessible. Then and now. So when this guy, Tim Naor Hilton, Chief Executive of Refugee Action, who is said to be campaigning for reform of UK asylum rules, that is the kind of thing that I refer to. What did Terminus Council get asked to do as a bureaucracy by any of those councillors who got elected in 1990? What did they want the council to do? Where are the memos? Where are the letters? Where are the emails from those councillors about any of these campaigning issues? What did they campaign for? So let's look at this as a comparison. This is one of the two editorials in the Financial Crimes today. First one is Johnson's broken pledges to Northern England, and the second is the Australia's vaccine order is an admission of failure. Let's look first at the broken pledges to Northern England that the Financial Crimes is saying, accusing Boris Johnson of perpetrating. And its subheading is cuts to rail lines and social care support will come at a political cost. Leveling up disadvantaged regions has become the totemic slogan of Boris Johnson's Conservative government. Its pledges are now crashing into the realities of cost. Twice in a week, the Boris Johnson government has broken or rowed back from promises, scrapping parts of the HS2 and Northern powerhouse rail projects, and scaling back social care support for poorer households. In both cases, the impact will be felt most keenly in Northern England. The political cost, especially in some formerly Labour-held area that helped Johnson win his landslide 2019 election victory, may be considerable. Now, let's look at the HS2 referenced by the Financial Crimes. Remember, the Financial Crimes has boasted in the form of the statement by the Lebanese Muslim-born woman who is the holder of the post of editor currently, that the Financial Times is the capitalist Bible or Bible of capitalism. If the Financial Times is the Bible of capitalism, then it is not a practical newspaper, is it? Because it's an ideological paper, that it is engaged in lying for an ideology. So therefore, the capitalist Bible conceals the Financial Crimes' criminal purpose, criminal core. The by definition, it will be engaged in perpetrating the lies that suit the capitalist ideological narrative. So, when it says that the HS2, part of the HS2 has been cut, and that the Financial Crimes treats as evidence of Boris Johnson giving the promise to the North. Let's assert that Boris Johnson has nothing to do with HS2 whatsoever. The HS2 criminality was foisted on the economy by a bunch of the criminal lobbies that abuse the supposed legacy of J.M. Keynes, that infrastructure adventurism is the answer to the economic slowness in the economy, let's say. Now that is a completely capitalist stupidity. I mean, going to the pre-British centuries in the subcontinent, Muhammad Tughlaq can be compared as the embodiment of idiocies of that nature, because Tughlaq removed the capital of his administration, and it cost untold losses, untold miseries. So Tughlaq is, to the long-range historians, associated with stupidity and abuse of the structure. And J. Maynard Keynes is a kind of tughlaq as interpreted by the capitalists, morons. Creating an infrastructure like the HS2 is not an economically beneficial event, quite apart from the fact that it entails more than £100 billion of waste of public money. There is no evidence whatsoever that even when completed, let's say theoretically, even when completed, even when put in operation, HS2 will produce economic benefit, environmental benefit. Why? Because the construction of a lunatic project like HS2, which is barely begun, has already cost the lives of hundreds of millions insects and creatures, and has felled hundreds of thousands of trees which cannot be built, which cannot be grown in less than 100 years. And the financial crimes is doing serious criminal negligent act in this editorial, as is every other part of Fleet Street, including notably The Guardian, which is peddling the cause of HS2. Now, for the last 5 years, neither the Financial Crimes, nor The Guardian, nor the Daily Mail, nor the Daily Mirror has had any examination of the costs and the benefits of the HS2 whatsoever. So today's Fleet Street papers lying for HS2 is a criminality. Nothing to do with Boris Johnson, it's a criminality, because they are not relating the HS2 to any benefit, any sustainability, any economic benefit, any social benefit, any environmental benefit whatsoever. As if that is not bad enough. They are not saying how HS2, the high speed, would improve railway transport or improve the experience of the passengers and would bring something to the equation that the passengers are not currently able to use. And the other thing is that there is no need in a country of the limited space of England, there is no need for a high-speed rail of the description that the criminal peddlers have been peddling. So we shall be talking about all of those later or in other parts. This is just about, I think it's about 2 hours since we started. This part A. Part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel. Part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, dated Monday the 22nd of November 2021.